This is Zichru Daf Simanim Gemara in Zevachim Daf Hey. And Hey, as the word sounds like, is Hey. And we're going to have a fabulous picture over here of someone standing or lying, I shall say, on a haystack. Now, there's this rabbi. He's lying on a haystack and he's wondering, I don't understand, if the carbon isn't meratzeh, if the carbon doesn't work, then why do you bring the carbon? The whole purpose of a carbon, of course, is to get ritzoi, to get atonement, v'chulu. But if not, then why are you bringing the carbon? That's point one of Reish Lakish's kasha on the daf. Point number two is going to be, we see over here a carbon asham that is just grazing until it gets a mum. And when it gets a mum, what's going to happen? It's going to be brought as an ayla. Why? Because the owner died, and therefore it's then going to be brought afterwards as an ayla. And finally, we have a debate over here between two brothers whether the Yarshim are going to inherit the carbon when the owner dies and whether they will receive a kapara. So Dav Hey, in our haystack, we're in a barn, and we have a rabbi lying on a haystack wondering the kasha of Reish Lakish, that if the carbon's not meratza, why is it brought? We have the halacha, we have a sheep over here grazing next to that haystack until it gets a mum, because after the owner died, the asham will then be brought as an ayla. And then point number three, we have brothers debating whether they inherit their mother and they're going to have to bring the carbon or not. So we go a little bit deeper into our 3 points of the daf. Point number one, again, Dav Hey on the haystack, the rabbi wondering where Reish Lakish is kasha. Imein meratze lama bayin. Reish Lakish lying in his stomach in the base medrash and asking him, Kasher meim yirtzu. If the carbon is shechted shalei lishma, then yirtzu, they should give kabara. V'emein meratzin, and if not, says Reish Lakish, I don't get this whole mishnah. Lama bayin. Why are you bringing it as a carbon? Says Rav Elazar, bayin la'achar misa. Says Rav Elazar, carbonos are brought after the owner's death. In a case of a yeledis that gives birth, and she has to bring a chatas and a ayla, she brings the chatas and dies, says Rav Elazar, proving if you yarshin aylasa, the yarshin bring the ayla. The yarshim certainly aren't getting ritzoi because the woman is no longer, and yet the carbon is still brought. Says Reish Lakish, that's not a raya. That's only by an ayla, which can be brought after the owner dies. Because it could also be brought, therefore it can be brought shalei lishma, but an asham, says Reish Lakish, I don't understand. That can't be brought after the owner's death, and therefore it should not be brought even when it was shechted shalei lishma. Reish Lakish says, Eftach ani pischel and avshai, I'll have to answer for myself. Abaye says, how do we learn out? I saw it says bechatas, which teaches a chata shalei lishma is going to be possible, but an ayla will remain kosher. Then we're going to have a hekesh from shlamim that such an asham is not meratzah. So that's point number one. The rabbi on the haystack, reminiscent of Reish Lakish lying on his stomach in the base medrash, wondering that if the carbon is not kosher, why in the world are we bringing it? Point number two is going to be that we have these sheep grazing, waiting to get a mum, that an asham is indeed brought after the owner's death. Meiser asham lazar demonstrates an ayla can be brought after the owner's death, even though it's not meratzeh. Reish Lakish says that's not true. It's only by an ayla, but not by an asham, which is not brought. Amrayim come along and they ask if Lazar should have answered that asham. Guess what is brought? Why? Allah mishmisina and asham. What do? You leave it to graze until it gets a mum, yirash tistayev, and then it's redeemed, and the money is used for an ayla. Rav Shisha says that an asham is only brought limaisarai, for the surplus, meaning the redemption money is used as a carbon, meaning as you saw in the picture, one sheep is swapped for another one, that it's only the money that's going to be used, but the asham itself is not brought. Chatas as well, the redeeming money is used for a carbon after the owner dies, if he doesn't need two chatais and then dies. But when a chatas is disqualified, shalei lishma, says the Gemara, chatas shalei lishma is only the chatas. So Rav Elazar could have answered Reish Lakish's kasha that indeed an asham is as well at some level brought even after the owner dies. Point number three in our daf is at the entrance to the barn, we have the Yarshim arguing about whether they're going to acquire the carbon and receive a kapara. Reish Lakish agreed to Rav Elazar an ayla can be brought without being meratzeh. Why? In the case of the ledas, the Yarshim bring the ayla. The Amoraim then come along and ask, why did Reish Lakish not say that, guess what, you know why the Yarshim bring the carbon? Because they themselves get a kapara. Says Avada Bar Masna, what are you talking about? She gives birth, the kid should get a kapara? What does that mean? Says Ravasi, what do you mean? The Oledis herself, she had multiple assays that she needs a kapara for. She would get them with one carbon, so why not the kids as well? Says the Gemara, if that were to be true, if you're going to tell me that the kids get a kapara, lememra dekanilu, that means that the kids have a kinyan. Rav Yechanan says the case that if a mincha is left for his two kids, you bring it, and it's not going to be considered shotfim, meaning they do not own it. So even though Rav Yechanan says Yarshim cannot affect Tamura, says the Gemara, it's because they do. It's not because they have a kinyan and shutfin cannot make Tamura, but rather a separate drasha. So that's point number 3, the level of kapara that the kids could get in the parents' carbon in the case of the Yerledis. So again, Daf Hey, we have the rabbi lying on top of a hay, of a haystack, reminiscent of Reish Lakish, lying at the entrance of the Beis Medrash, wondering if the carbon is not maratza, why are you bringing it? Point number 2 is our discussion about the asham, that after the owner dies, the money is brought after the asham gets a mum as an ayla. And point number 3 is going to be at the entrance to the barn, the brothers arguing whether they're going to get the ritzoy, whether they're going to get the kapara, whether they're going to bring the carbon of their mother. Gemara in Zevachim, Daf Hey, the haystack.